focused on the appointment scheduling and booking industry, and kind of like the folks that put out the campaign Got Milk, if you remember that, we're trying to get people to realize that they need scheduling, kind of like they need milk. Not everybody does it yet, if you can imagine that. And part of the reason is that they may not understand it. They may not really quite get why it can help their business. So the reason this exists is really to provide a way for the industry as a whole to communicate what it does and to help those businesses that are interested find a solution that fits their needs. So one of the things that we do is that we provide a website, which is very much about learning and surprisingly not about selling to people. And I think that's part of a misunderstanding that people have, because there's such much of an expectation that sites are for lead generation, or going to try to get my name and sell it to somebody. So salespeople are going to start calling me. We're completely the opposite of that. We basically try to provide a very easy resource to use. And one of the key parts of it is what we call the vendor directory. And if I click on this, it should bring up, there we go, a website, and you can see the vendor directory. So let's say I was in the business of beauty and wellness, and I'm looking for and say I'm in the UK, and I say I want a vendor that can provide me with a solution, for my business in my location. And you can literally select from a number of categories and find just those vendors that are interesting to you. So the idea here is really to provide a resource to businesses, but also a resource for the members who are the vendors to get information about their industry. So one of the questions I oftentimes get is, why in the world would I want to start an industry association? That's a great question. I would say that I liked the industry when I was involved with it in my last company. It was doing high tech my entire life. And I just found it to be such a great benefit for the businesses that we worked with. And I was very enthusiastic about it. And so when I parted ways with the company, I didn't want to give that up. And I thought, I'd met a lot of nice people, both competitors as well as people that were in the industry. And I felt that there was a need for an independent viewpoint and a spokesperson for the industry. Also, I was excited that this could pass what I called the grandma test. Now, you may not know what that is, but in my entire life, I always tried to explain to my grandmother what I did for a living. And if you guys are in B2B, you'll understand that's very difficult. At the end, they would say, he has something to do with electricity. That's about as close as they got. But I could actually explain this to my grandma and say, hey, I help people get together with other people to, make a meeting or get together with an appointment, and they could understand that. So I'd like to talk about the history of appointment scheduling. This part's going to take about an hour, so I hope that's not too long, only kidding. But just so you know, the current system of time started around 2000 BC. And the first appointment was well before that. And it was with a medicine man, which is not going to be surprising to anybody who's tried to get a doctor's appointment. He's sitting there, he says, I'm busy, come back tomorrow when the sun comes over the tree. So the reason I'm explaining this is that medical appointments are really sort of the beginning of what became the use of appointment scheduling, primarily for those very busy people who had very busy schedules, who had they were the scarce resource. And it was doctors, it was lawyers, it could be accountants. And then later, we start to see this expanding into other areas of business, which we'll talk about, everything from getting a haircut to, going to the bank potentially. But initially, this was very medical focused. And, one of the things that I found fascinating is that I learned about something called wave scheduling. And Louis, I'm not looking at questions, but if there are questions, please fire them at me and interrupt. If you want to read something that's truly frightening, the Pediatric Association for their doctor says, this is a great thing called wave scheduling. You just schedule all your people so they come at the same time at 11 o'clock. And that way, you've got at least 3 or 4 people if one of them's late, and you can just, pile them in there very efficiently. Of course, it's not very good for you as a patient or as a customer, but it's great for the doctor. So when I read about that, I started to realize that a lot of these systems were meant for the convenience, if you will, of the person getting the appointment, not necessarily for the person making the appointment. However, that has begun to change because appointment scheduling is now becoming part of a business process and part of something that helps customers and helps people that are working with businesses to have a better experience. So I want to digress for a moment and talk about the definition. So appointment scheduling in general is scheduling with a person. I'm going to make an appointment with Louis or a couple other people. We're going to set up a meeting in person or maybe on the phone or through conferencing. That's what traditional appointment scheduling is. The other terminology you'll often see is booking, which is both an English term, as in the UK, for appointment scheduling, but also has come to mean more scheduling for a slot, scheduling for a resource. So if you make a restaurant reservation, you don't say, I have an appointment with the waiter. Now there's going to be a waiter there, but that's not what you're doing. You're getting a table. Now there is some overlap. For example, resources can be used in appointment scheduling. For example, if I want to schedule a meeting with some folks and I need a conference room, I'll need to say, well, and I need a conference room. And so the system will go out and make sure that there's a conference room available and it will block it out. Or I could say, hey, I need a conference room which has at least, 6 chairs and a table, and maybe I need one which has a video conferencing screen. So you can see that, you can add these capabilities. But in general, we talk about scheduling as human to human. And then the other sort of variation on this is classes, where you're going to be booking to maybe take a class, or it could be just a group meeting, but there might be limitations in terms of the number of people. You might have a wait list feature. You could have e-commerce, and that's very common, especially in some of the verticals. So I'm not going to talk about queuing much because it's truly painful if you've been to the Department of Motor Vehicles, but it is a very common mechanism where you have a lot of walk-in traffic. It's a way to deal with a lot of volume, and it does have the opportunity to combine appointment scheduling. For example, at a government agency, for example, you might make an appointment and you're making an appointment at a block of time where there might be other people, and then you might queue, but that's a way to sort of manage that flow so you don't get too many people. Not a bad use, but I'm not going to talk much about queuing. It's been around actually a long time. You see it at any venue where you have a lot of people that are vying for a service, or something like fast food, or it could be a government agency. So I wanted to ask a quick question on polling here. Are you using an appointment scheduling solution today? And if you could just type in your answers to Louis, you can maybe read back because I can't see the chat here, but
yeah, just put them into chat.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just curious whether people use appointment scheduling for themselves, in their own business, because I think a lot of you are doing solo businesses or consultancies, whether you do it as part of your work with a company or with companies you work with, number 2, or both, or if you don't use it at all. I just sort of want to get a sense of, today's use of this solution. So I'm going to have to wait for the answers to come in here. And
so it looks like a lot of the answer, probably half of the people are using Calendly.
Mm-hmm.
And then a few are using HubSpot, Outlook, and a few other tools.
Sure.
And
anybody not using scheduling? Nobody's going to admit it.
Willing to admit it.
Well, I think what I'm hearing is a lot of people using what I call the personal tools that would be used for individuals or SMBs, which is not unusual. But one of the things I wanted to talk about a little bit was when you think about the use cases here, sorry about that, there are many use cases that are what I would consider to be business to consumer. You've got, beauty and wellness, which could be beauty salons. You've got educational institutions who are, increasingly during COVID, for example, they were creating appointments for their professors to meet with students, for example. Obviously, class scheduling is another sort of use case, but the one-to-one use case there. Financial services, banks, credit unions, and others. It could include individual financial people, could be financial planners or people to do mortgage lending. Fitness is a big one because obviously classes, and of course that became difficult during COVID. But what was interesting about fitness is that Google, and I'll talk about Reserve with Google later, actually modified their system to allow businesses to offer virtual appointments, which they never were going to do. They were only going to allow you to do physical appointments. So, we see that in a lot of industries where what was, I would call a nice to have feature for appointment scheduling in business to consumer became a must have. Also in financial services, there are many banks and credit unions right around when COVID started that basically realized they could not open up their lobbies and their offices without sort of slotting people in. They would let you come in, but only allowing, say, 1 or 2 people during a time period, for example. So, you know, I think the technology was there and it was ready, and then it got a really good opportunity to be used during that time. Whether it goes back to the way it was, we don't know, but I think a lot of things are changed irrevocably, and I'd like to get some thoughts on that. We also see, obviously, services like, you know, people coming to fix things at your house, which includes a travel component as well as appointment scheduling or booking. And there are others, but the idea here is that each of these consumer spaces, if you will, is really impacted by appointment scheduling. And then we have on the other side, the B2B, which is the professional services. A lot of you who do consultancies, for example, for marketing, for sales, a lot of consulting to B2B companies or maybe B2C. And you're using individual solutions for setting up meetings, but also within those companies, you see this is an integrated part of lead generation, as well as things like recruiting as special use cases. So there's actually some really good, solid use cases, but there are a lot of them. So in the B2C side, as I said, you see a lot of verticals that are, you know, a person who used to maybe go into a physical location, and maybe they still will, but it will be virtualized, promoting this booking link on their website through their emails, social media. Facebook is an example. They might integrate that with a CRM solution. So part of the issue here, though, is that you've got you know, other systems involved, and that's one of the reasons why this is an interesting business, because you may decide to do a best of breed solution, but then, you know, we have to integrate that with workflows of other solutions. So you're seeing essentially some companies offer one, you know, a complete solution, and others that offer a sort of, you know, horizontal solution. So let me just stop right there for a moment. Louis, I just want to make sure that if there's any questions, I can address them before I kind of power through.
We don't have any right now, Sim.
Okay.
So people, please put them into chat, and we'll get to them as we go along.
Great. So I'm going to talk about story time. I think I missed a slide here. I did. I missed business to business. I realized that that was not there. So this is your area before we go on to the story time. A lot of verticals that are more, you know, industrial, if you will, they promote the scheduling, but it also may be for demos. But a lot of this is sales enablement. In other words, you know, setting up meetings with you. You oftentimes will have a business development rep call you or email you. I'm sure you've all experienced this, or you're setting this up for your own companies, and their entire job is really to schedule a meeting with an account executive, for example. But then also the people in that company always have a link in their email or in their signature that says, hey, if you ever want to talk with me. I think that the complications on the B2B side oftentimes come from having to have multiple people involved or people with specific skills. I can think of many examples where, you know, there's a call being set up and you want to have the account exec, oh, but we also need the specialist for this product area who knows about this kind of business loan or who knows about this particular product line of our company. That gets really tricky because either the system has to know that and have that built into the rules, or the person has to manually kind of do that, which sort of defeats the purpose, if you will. So that's where it gets really interesting. And all of these things are solved, by the way, by a lot of these companies. But again, a lot of it has to do with how you are defining your problem. So I'm going to do story time. Notice the unhappy face here, because these are not the best stories. And as I had told Louis in the beginning, you know, the names will be changed to protect the guilty. But first one is the mystery of the missing retail concierge slots. So we've got a very high-end retailer, national business, very well respected. They have a concierge service, which is basically to help people to, you know, get outfitted, get their clothing collection put together, you know, whatever they need in the store. They launch an integrated appointment service. Sounds like a great idea. They can promote this idea of the concierge. It's been around for years, but they really want to make it available to a larger group of people. They put on the website. What can possibly go wrong, right? Well, the first thing that happens is you go to the locations that you might want to get an appointment. There's no appointment slots. You can't even find anything. And it's a mystery, right? The second thing that happens is the concierge staff doesn't even use the system. They all have a little black book, basically, because they've been working there for many years. They know who their good customers are. They have little notes in there. They have a calendar. They love that little black book, and they're not giving that up. And third, the retailer then gets a black eye from their customers and from anybody who may have already been a customer and might want to use the system. They're like, your system doesn't work. This is terrible. So why is that? So if you look at what happened here, a lot of work was done to develop a beautiful website, to develop, a strategy. Obviously, you can imagine lots of meetings about, how we're going to do this, but ultimately it required manual effort from the staff to create these slots, to go into a system and to say, I'm available during these times. This is what I do. Here's my little bio. Guess what? They didn't do that. Longtime staff really feared, number one, putting any kind of information in the system in that would expose their customer book, if you will. And you see this oftentimes with sales people in hairdressers and other kinds of personal services where they have a personal relationship and they really don't want to share that data. It's common in sales across the board, but especially in these kinds of businesses. So it comes down to, what are you going to give me? What's in it for me as an employee to play here? And I think that's one of the major reasons this failed, is that lack of buy-in. And they also did not do a lot of training. They didn't really test the system out. So as beautiful as it looked, as great the idea was, it really failed miserably. And I'm not even sure today that it's working, because again, I think the staff just never really wanted to use this. So that's our first example. Again, names are changed to protect the guilty. Now we have the next mystery, the bumbling of the banking booking. So banking is one of the best areas for appointment scheduling. We had a regional bank whose name shall not be known. And I have talked to these folks, so this is a personal experience. And they rolled out, a really nice program, integrated appointments for loans, for account openings, for services like going in to get your safety deposit box. Those kinds of things are very helpful. Again, what could go wrong? It was a great idea. Well, number one, the customer appointments were not known to the staff. People would walk into the bank and say, hey, I have an appointment. And there's like, okay, I'm not sorry, who are you? And they'd be looking it up. The system didn't really show them. So there was clearly something going on there, and it was not a great experience. On top of that, if they were coming in for a particular activity, let's say a loan, a mortgage loan, which might require a specialist or somebody who might want to look at investment accounts, rolling over a 401k, which banks love, right? They don't necessarily have the right person. They would just have a person serve them, and then they realize, well, I can't help you, which is not what you want to do. Also, at the end of this, in a very short period of time, the bank shut off the system and basically got back to a normal, or what they consider to be normal, which was submitting forms which said, hey, come on in, put your name and your email in, and we'll get back to you. And I've seen this, by the way, many times, where a website will say, yeah, make an appointment, put your name and your email in, and we will get back to you to set up the appointment. I'm thinking, what is wrong with this picture? I mean, that doesn't work. And I actually tried a few of those myself as a customer, and nobody ever calls back. That's a big fail. So what do we do here? Why did this happen? Well, first of all, there was a lack of integration with existing banking systems. This system was just implemented kind of as a silo. It just sort of was imposed on the company. They said, we're going to start using this. And that's why people didn't know why people were there. They had no clue what was going on. The staff was not included in the setup or the rollout. It was a top-down decision made by the person that bought the system. And ultimately, the staff was really trying to sabotage the system. So when I learned all this, by the way, I was like, why in the world would this happen? Well, the person that acquired that system within the organization was not liked by most of the people. They did not like that person. It didn't matter what that person brought in. And when they chose the solution, and it was a good solution, they were going to do everything in their power to not make it work. So it got shoved to the side. People didn't want to use it. And then they could point to it and say, see, we knew this wasn't going to work. Now, a couple of months after this person ended up leaving, not sure exactly who said what to whom, they call up and they go, we'd really like an appointment scheduling. So, that it was all about not getting the right champion potentially. And, but that can have detrimental effects. So what are our lessons learned from this? First of all, and this is not news to anybody here, I think, about any system that you roll out, whatever it is, you've got to have clear requirements. You have to know what you want. You have to know, what's important and what's not important, who's actually using it, will they adopt it? You have to have good planning. And I think what underlies a lot of failures is the ease of use, not just for the consumer, right, which is very important, but also for the employees, and getting their cooperation and understanding how it can help them and what's in it for them. There's also things like just, starting with people that are interested in what you're doing a test drive, doing, obviously iterative process changes as you go along. None of these are shocking. And when you get larger projects, obviously you need senior management support. You need to get configurations and, things that are cross-functional. This takes more time, obviously, communication and training, and obviously project plans. But, the idea here is that without these things, these systems are not going to work. So
Sim,
I'll take a break here for a moment. Yes, sir.
So a question, how do you get that staff buy-in if it's not there? This is,
Yeah.
The idea that technology is easy, people is hard, goes
Yeah.
back a long time. And if people are, think that in some way, for example, what makes them special is their knowledge, their information, they don't want to share it and give away that, or things of that sort. So how can organizations get better staff buy-in if that really is an issue for them?
Absolutely. Okay, so here's the secret to success. What's in it for me? And the way that I've seen that work really well is, let's take the case of a financial institution where you've got a bunch of mortgage brokers. And if you know mortgage brokers, they are kind of a high-strung group of folks, kind of like real estate folks. They're all about getting that win, getting that loan. And they have their ways of doing things, and they don't want to show their calendar to anybody. So what you do is you find a small group that are a little more amenable to this and say, look, one of the things that's going to happen here is you're going to get people making an appointment with you that just came to the website, and you don't even know who they are, but they will find you and you get a win. And I've seen this repeatedly where one of the folks gets an over the transom loan. And I've heard it, oh, we got a jumbo loan. George got this loan. It's unbelievable. The appointment scheduling system brought it in. And then all of a sudden, everybody else wants to play. And it's the same across the board. You find a small group, you really work with them, then you identify a win, which usually is monetary, a new customer, a new sale, or whatever it is, and then everybody jumps on board. And that's what I've mostly seen works, other than just the people that are interested in, better ways of doing things and improving the way they work, which isn't everybody. So I found that actually will ignite, let's say, the project.
Yeah, I've seen that in some other marketing programs too, where, maybe sales was resistant and just a small group of salespeople got on board. They got all the benefits. And, so it was a pull model rather than a push model.
Yeah. And I actually can see the chat here. Michael saying, some companies are scraping employee calendars and emails to collect information for sales prospecting. Yeah, I'm not a fan of scraping, but I do think that the idea of connecting to an employee calendar to see when they're available is probably appropriate. But, that's really probably beyond the pale if you're going to go grab other people's data without their permission. So the other question from David about stats related to number of meetings being scheduled directly on the website. Let me hold that, because that really depends on the scenario. There aren't any overall stats, I would say, but there are examples where that's happened. Okay, so just make sure we do a time check here. I want to talk about Google and Facebook, then we are going to come back to a couple of the things. We're going to do some successes here, not just the failures. But one of the things that's very critical, especially on the B2C side, is Google. And obviously Google's used for everything. If you're not familiar with it, there's a lot of data on the website about this. But Setting up a business profile is critical. Reserve with Google is a program that has actually a booking and scheduling link inside of Google results. If you haven't seen it, it's pretty much being propagated everywhere. And then there's something called Google Assistant and Google Duplex, which I don't know if people use that much, but I've actually seen it happening. So what this is, if you're not familiar with it, if you talk to your Google Assistant, sort of like Siri, you can say, get me an appointment at this, and then we'll go out and connect to a calendar at that business. Now, if that business doesn't have a calendar system or an automated scheduling system, Google Assistant will actually call them. And this is an AI system. And if you haven't seen this, it actually is in use. I tried it myself while I was in Wellesley, getting a haircut at a place. And I said, I'm going to go on to reserve with Google because I see you're in here. And it actually called them at the desk. And I said, put it on speakerphone. And they ran through the scenario, and it was unbelievable. This is an example that Google publishes about an appointment being set up for a hair salon appointment. So remember this.
How can I help you? Hi, I'm calling to book a women's haircut for a client. I'm looking for something on May 3rd. Sure, give me one.
So that actually, what you just heard was not a real person. That was a Google AI. It's truly somewhat frightening, but that person goes through the process of actually, booking that. Now, this next one is actually quite interesting. For some reason, I can't get to the play button here because it's being blocked. Here we go. This is a restaurant reservation being made by Google.
See how may I hear you?
Hi, I'd like to reserve a table for Wednesday the 7th.
For 7 people?
It's for 4 people.
4 people when?
Next Wednesday at 6 p.m.
Oh, actually, we reserve for upper 5 people. For 4 people, you can come.
Okay, I'm going to stop it there. Or at least try to stop it there, because what ends up happening is there aren't any reservations available. And she says, just come on in. It's not too busy. But those people sound like real people, and that is an AI. And so one of the things you might say about this is, wow, that's a little bit frightening. The one thing I will say here, though, is that you want to, as a business, avoid having Duplex calling you. The reason it's calling these locations is they have no appointment scheduling system set up in an automated way. So basically, Google doesn't have a choice. If you had Reserve with Google hooked in, it would do it automatically, which makes a lot more sense. So I don't know how people feel about that. I've got mixed feelings about the solution, but Michael, you were asking about chatbots, and yes, that has been used as well. In fact, I was involved with a project that used chatbots in several use cases, primarily with Facebook chat. And what we found on that, to sort of talking about technology, is that it doesn't really work that well because it's an awful lot of steps to make an appointment. The chatbot says, well, what are you coming in for? Okay, what day would you like? Okay, what time would you, there's a lot of text going back and forth, where what I have found is most people are pretty receptive to the idea of seeing a calendar, sort of icon in a calendar, let's say, is similar to other things they see in their life. They know what that is. And so therefore, the idea of trying to do that through a chat when you don't have to doesn't necessarily work that well. At least that's my opinion. The other side of this is Facebook. So if you have customers that are using Facebook, or you have a small business, they have a built-in appointment scheduling, and it's actually very complete, pretty cool. And they also have a way to connect with other partners who are the vendors. The only thing I would say about their built-in solution, it's kind of like if you only use Facebook for everything you do, and all of your customers are on Facebook, which might be the case for some small businesses, great, but it's really very hardwired and it doesn't play well with others, which is not shocking. And that's kind of a trend in some of these systems. So story time. These are some good stories, better stories. Magical makeover and beauty appointments, a big area, not happening as much now, but it is coming back actually. So large beauty retailer, this is a process where a lot of work was spent to create an integration with the website, an integration with their Facebook app, which does show appointment scheduling, not quite a chatbot because it has things like times being displayed, which makes it a little easier. And of course, Reserve with Google over here showing you how to do it right in the Google search. This was a very large project. There was a lot of buy-in, obviously, because it was a core business need. So they had their IT department working, they had integration with the programming interfaces. But when a company really knows this is a core to their business, in this case, this retailer has people coming in, sitting down, getting a makeover. It's all part of really their primary sales and marketing technique. And there's other kinds of businesses like that. One would be like a bridal salon, like David's Bridal or something, where you don't just show up there with your bridesmaids. You have to make an appointment. So, or photography studios. There's certain situations where it is assumed that's how you're going to do business. So in this case, it's not so much, you don't have to build an ROI. You don't have to prove it out. You just know you better do it well. Another example in the same space would be small beauty retailers, might be individual people literally working out of their homes or small businesses. And here, the good news is there's a number of vendors that provide what I call out of the box capabilities, where they will put everything in there you need. They got the appointment scheduling, they'll list you in a directory. They may have their own directory of providers, which is, you know, depending on their reach, helpful or not. And you don't have to know anything, you know, as a business owner. You simply use their technology. So on the banking side, I want to talk about this. This is an example, and it was a public example. So Lake Michigan Credit Union has 53 locations, $5.5 billion assets under management. And they decided to approach this very methodically. So they had a process where they would develop their solution, or really more configuration, because they're not building the solution, they're working with a vendor, training people, doing a soft launch with a, you know, internal only 1 full month launch. They started putting the scheduling links on their site and, you know, building out their email and text confirmations and reminders. They started including signage in the branches saying, hey, you can do appointment scheduling, you know, even for people that walk in, or email or online banking banners, convenience, you know, playing to that. And then getting feedback, not just from customers, but from their own employees, and then trying to improve, just iterating. Oh, we should put it on our product pages. We should put it in all of our email signatures, everybody in the bank. We should put it in our bio pages when people go to the page that explains who you are, say, make an appointment. So again, this process was very methodical. It was very well thought out. It didn't go perfectly, but unlike that previous example I gave where it was an absolute disaster, this went very, very well. They also had some KPIs, and they said, you know, we're going to measure this. So you're asking about, you know, what kind of results you get. And they were interested in lots of things. I just picked one set of measurements, which was, you know, how many people opted for text messaging, just sort of an interesting, you know, measurement that shows interest. And then, you know, how many of those are actually prospects? This is the key question. Is this bringing in new people or not? Is this expanding the base, right? No matter what business you're in. And then what kind of, you know, businesses were coming in, and, you know, were they new opportunities or were they brand new members, right? So this to me was probably one of the most interesting things. And then they said, well, this is the actual revenue, or the size of the mortgage loans that was brought in. And it was funny because when I worked with this customer, I asked him as we were going to give this presentation, I said, you know, you collected like 2.1 million in new members based on an appointment scheduling campaign. That's pretty good mortgage. How much are those loans actually worth? And I honestly didn't think he would tell me because nobody ever tells you like what the stuff's really worth. Well, he says, oh, let me just call up the CFO and ask him how. Well, it was worth, you know, $570,000 in interest income over the life of the loan. So, you know, a lot of solutions in IT, including appointment scheduling, are sold most based on an ROI, as you all know. You know, what's the ROI of this? And I think for those companies where appointment scheduling and booking is a must-have, they don't even ask that question. It's just like, I got to do this or I'm not going to be in business. But for the others, you know, they're thinking about, hey, I've got other projects I could do. I've got other uses of funds. Where should I spend that money? And I think one of the most amazing things here is that they were able to prove this to themselves, that this was a valuable initiative and that it had a true return. So to me, this was really like one of the very few times I'd had a customer I've worked with who told me what it was really worth. And it was great. So that's exciting. And this is the kind of thing that I just think is fun about the industry. Now, I'm going to back for a moment here and talk about Etiquette. what's interesting is I had a couple of people, including George, send me an article about, what's been going on, because I know from your responses that many of you use Calendly. And there's many systems like Calendly that are quite good, and they're all becoming almost fully featured relative to each other. So there's a lot of competition there, but they keep adding features. And one of the things that's happening is everybody's starting to use these things, or not everybody, but certainly a lot of people. And some folks are getting annoyed because, I think like these businesses that I was talking about, the same thing can happen on an individual level where, for example, I send a link out and I say, yeah, I'm available, make an appointment with Cimarron. And they click and like, there's nothing for 10 days. And by the way, that's going to be happening to me because I'm going on vacation, So, but if I do that without any context, if I just blindly send a link out and I don't really set expectations, it's kind of annoying and maybe detrimental to our relationship, So typically, personally, I will check my appointment schedule and I'll say, I am available Thursday and Friday, because people will say, oh, I'm available Thursday. But, to pick a good time, you can click here. And I'll also just say, or just let me know what works for you, because some people just don't want to click the link. And I know that. It's just the way life is. And then the Wall Street Journal did something about this as well. And I think that this idea of looking like a jerk, that's a little rough. I think that what happens is that there's a assumption, let's say, that people have when they send you an email. And I'm sure you all get these every single day saying, hey, we have web development services. We have this, we have that. Hey, make an appointment with me. I just got one the other day that says, I'm coming to town, and when would you like to book an appointment with me? We've all seen that. So I think that's more about just people doing very aggressive, let's say, and insensitive invitations. It's not about the technology so much as about the way it's being used. And I hope that you agree with that. If not, I'd like to hear. But now, one of the things that just came in on the chat is a question about time zones. And pretty much all of the systems do recognize time zone in varying degrees. They will know that your local time will translate into the different time for the person you're inviting. The way that's done is varied. Sometimes people will be asked what their time zone is. In most cases, the software today will use the IP address of the browser, if it's a browser-based solution, or the time of the, usually the browser itself, and will determine or at least guess the location. This doesn't always work. And then you'll have a chance to change the time zone. But as you know, in a calendar, you can also just set the time zone yourself. But that is a tricky one. And in fact, there are bugs in the industry where, especially across time zones, in the future, it gets really tricky because of daylight standard time. And if you are not familiar with the fact that places like India are on the half hour, it can get pretty let's say, complicated. But the better solutions will handle time zones and should handle them for all the participants. So in terms of this issue of etiquette, I think that, using appointment scheduling has to be done in a context. If you are in a sales and marketing environment where you're sending blind mails out to people, you got to be a little sensitive. If you're working with somebody who is a current customer, it's a little different, because oftentimes, you have an existing relationship and you're doing follow-up, and people love actually to have the convenience and saying, look, we need to talk another, in a couple of weeks. I don't know exactly what's available to you. Sometimes you'll have obviously a meeting every 2 weeks at the same date and time, right? With internal folks or external folks. But in many cases, you can't do that. You say, look, I know you want to get together in a couple of weeks. Why don't you pick a time that's convenient for you? And I think most people will say, that's great. And by the way, the network effect of Calendly is quite interesting, because in Calendly and in other systems too, but the other systems don't necessarily have the massive users. If I'm using Calendly, right, or another system, and you are also using it, and it knows both of our calendars, it will actually already filter out the times that I'm busy when I go to make the appointment. That's pretty cool if we're both using it. Now, there are other systems, especially on the enterprise side, which are very interesting. So if I'm doing business with another company, we can actually temporarily sort of associate with each other. So our business calendars can look at what's called the free busy time, which is when are you available? Not what's on your calendar, but just are you available or not? And then those systems will actually make suggestions as to available times, especially if you have more than one person. That's getting very sophisticated. And it's actually one of the most, cool things, because, you're not trying to send out a poll. And in fact, it's funny, Doodle, which you may be familiar with, is sort of was originally kind of a consumer product. It was kind of a fun little thing to say, hey, we're doodling, when we want to get together or whatever. And that has become a product that really takes advantage of that ability to look at different calendars and make recommendations for times. So anyway, it's very, I think, good to have this technology, but it all comes down to, how you use it. So I've got a question about implementing this in the communications plan. Most people have found that, they're uncomfortable having asynchronous and prefer to meet in person. I'm not sure I understand the questions. I'm not sure if it has to do with remote versus in person or not. Maybe that could be clarified. But
do you want to unmute yourself and ask the question?
yeah, that might be good. Just have a conversation right now, because
We can have a synchronous conversation right now.
absolutely, we're synchronous right now, and I
Yeah.
think I'm going to skip this next poll because I think
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Sure. Hi, everybody. So there are several apps that allow you to send somebody a video, and they can respond either with a video or with a text or with a chat. And then you can follow up and basically just have a conversation asynchronously. So rather than a live conversation.
Are you saying that you would send them some information first and then you talk afterwards? Or are you saying they can watch the video and you can talk while they're watching it? I'm not quite sure.
So I guess the sequence would be, I would record a video introducing myself, hey, do you have any questions, and blah, 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 whatever the business is. And then they would respond with a video or a text or a chat of their own, and I could respond, and we can go in a chain that way, but it's just asynchronous.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So it's more like using a, chat methodology instead of having to force a conversation at a specific time. Yeah, I think that's a great use of, I think part of it is that everybody has different ways that they like to communicate, right? And in fact, I think, Louis, you had said to me that one of the things, I think it was you're telling me the story about how, people put these appointment scheduling links on a website, nobody ever responded. But then when they said, well, look, we're going to have a briefing or a webinar every Thursday at 11 o'clock for half an hour. And if you're interested, you can come. And that got a lot more attention because people were much more comfortable in that situation. These are security people who didn't necessarily want to say who they were, in the security industry, much more comfortable going to that kind of a session than just like a one-on-one appointment. And you have to identify yourself. And I think I see a lot of companies doing that as well, where there's sort of almost like a classroom model, where you say, oh, sign up for the next, event, and you don't necessarily have to identify yourself. I think that's a great way as well. And what you're describing, I've seen, where people have this ability to sort of create a little bit of content and then have sort of a back and forth that's more comfortable for people without having to be nailed to the wall and say, I'm going to be there at 11:30. I think absolutely. And during the sales and marketing process, and especially during the sort of introducing yourself and your company to somebody else, it's really important, I think, to have different options. Some people love to download a white paper and they like to read. Other people like to watch a video. Some people like the ability to chat. And I think chat is one of those things. I was talking about QR codes where I thought this is never going to work. And I think chat is still yet to be proven as sort of like, the answer to all things. I think it can have a great use case, but what's started to happen, and I'm sure you're seeing this, is chat is becoming a robot chat, and it's not a human, and it's not very useful in some cases. In other cases, it is quite useful, right? But it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish as a user or potentially a prospect. You go to a website and you go, I have this nagging question, and I'd really just love to get the answer to the question, right? Can I go to the chat? And they have this little chat that pops up, and you start asking a question, it goes, and then you realize it's not a person, and you realize you're not going to get the answer, and then you get really frustrated, right? So I think that is just like a lot of things, you have to set the expectation. And when you're doing things like appointments, there has to be a clear understanding of what that's about. Are we just going to talk? Are we going to give a demo? Is it more of a classroom model where you don't have to necessarily put yourself out there? And all of that, I think, depends on the business you're in, as well as the kinds of personas you're talking to, right? And whether they really want to get involved and, face to face. But I think appointment scheduling links that say, okay, I've gotten to a point where I really want to talk to somebody, right? Have to be focused on what that person needs. If it's about a product, if it's about a particular, kind of thing they need to know about, if they're a technology person versus a business person, the appointment scheduling should allow them to specify enough information so they get the right person. And I think that's really key, the right person at the right time for the right conversation, right? And the systems all will support that. But as the person on the business side, you have to make sure it's easy. So it's, if you think about a bank, if you go to Lake Michigan Credit Union site or any, it typically will say, well, first of all, where are you? Where are you located? What's your zip code? Something like that. And they typically use a location finder and says, okay, here are the branches near you. Okay, click on that. And you say, well, I want to talk about a car loan. Well, it turns out the branches don't actually have people in them for car loans, right? So the fact that you said on here, and I want a car loan, they may actually send you to a virtual pool of people that handle those kinds of specialty loans. They're not going to go to the branch. The other thing that branches do, which has been very interesting in the financial services area, is they will have hours where the mortgage people or the car loan or whatever are in the branch, and then they will try to, set appointments up based on that schedule, which makes a lot of sense, so that you're there and you can take a bunch of appointments in a row. Now that gets back to the question of what's in it for me. If you're the employee, and you go, that system really made it efficient for me. I could go to the branch located over here from 9 to noon in the morning. I could do 3 appointments. That was great. Now you've got something. Now you've got a system that helps the employee do a better job. So I think that's great.
Sim, in that example that you mentioned, the difference wasn't that people didn't have to identify themselves. The old system was they literally got access, it said schedule your appointment right in the salesperson's calendar. And I think they didn't want what seemed like a sales call. And instead, by having just like every Thursday at 11, every Tuesday at 11, every Thursday at 3, we're going to have these demos, sign up. They still had to give their contact information and name, but it felt like they were going to be part of a group, which sometimes they were, and sometimes they were the only one, but it just didn't feel like I'm signing up for a sales call. And literally it went from 0 appointments to dozens in the first month.
Right.
It was massive. So
right. Familiar persona, basically.
Yeah, so we had a question here from Michael about the impact of video on during meetings. So Michael, are you wondering if people are more reticent to have meetings with video on?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting thing, especially from a sales perspective. At one level, I feel that video on is much more engaging and keeps people from multitasking. At another level, people can be hyper conscious of looking at themselves on video and turning it off. I've seen some salespeople turn off their videos when a prospect is on a call. And what I see then is the prospect turns off the video, and then all of a sudden it gets very sloppy. So with this new technology, the question is, what are the things that drive more engagement, more focus, better conversations, such as video? And does video on help a lot? And are there other things that keep a prospect engaged and focused and listening?
Right. Well, I mean, I think that is a question no matter what kind of engagement you have, whether it was an appointment that you scheduled or just a conversation, right? I think that what's happened is that we know that before the video conference boom occurred during coronavirus, there was always video conferencing, right? Most people did phone calls, but it was sort of like a special thing to do the video conference. You went to the special room that had the equipment, right, in the business setting. So it was unusual. And I think now that it's become, I guess, normalized in some ways through, and in fact, I would say that the coronavirus epidemic has, caused this to become more normalized in business environments. People are still trying to figure out what to do with it, to be honest, because a lot of times you're just sitting there and your face is in a little box and you're really like, what am I supposed to be doing, right? And it's not necessarily adding value. So I think we're still struggling. I know I am with, how you do that. And in some cases, a phone call is a better way to go if it's one-to-one sometimes. The thing about the video is it gives you some hints and gives you some clues as to what's going on with that person, and also makes the conversation a little easier to hand off from one person to another with signaling. But I think it's, I'm not sure that, how video has actually changed things other than we're still trying to figure out what to do with it in some cases.
Okay.
I will tell you, the appointment scheduling vendors have all scrambled to integrate every video system in the world. So, like if you use a Calendly or one of the systems like that, or a business to business, you'll see, oh, what would you like? Do you like Google Meet, or do you want this, or do you want Zoom, or do you want WebEx, or, whatever it is? They realized that that became a, absolute requirement for their solution. So again, another integration point for them to make it easier. So that just tells me that, yeah, it's a pretty important feature.
Cool.
Any other okay, we have Mark. Have you done research on best practice for email signatures with links for meetings? And curious if younger people are more likely than older people.
Yeah, there hasn't been, that I know, any vendors that or research around the use of these links. What I will tell you is that it's a best practice to put them in, kind of like, here's my phone number, here's my email, here's my appointment scheduling link. It's just a sort of like a courtesy for people. Now, that's the basic. Now you can go beyond that, especially when you're doing B2B marketing, and that link can actually, when you click on it, it already knows who you are. It's already coded. That's more of like a lead gen product where you'd have that link, integrated. Now, as far as the demographic question, I don't really know. I have not found much of a difference, but of course, we're all cool here on this call. We know how to use technology. I don't know. I think that there is a, in terms of just generally using a website or even an email to make appointments, one of the things is that when the coronavirus appointment scheduling was melting down, a couple of years ago, a lot of people couldn't even use, didn't use computers. You're talking about elderly folks or people that were in disadvantaged areas where they couldn't get to a computer. And in fact, the software was not working very well. And other people were then helping them by using the computers and talking to them on the phone as a workaround, if you remember that. So I do believe that, there is a barrier there in some ways with respect to the kind of people that are doing business and who are sending emails and they sort of expect signatures. I'm not sure how that applies, but I do know, there are some issues with respect to just, having this as a technology only solution.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay, more questions? Not at the moment, so.
Oh, I got one here.
What are best practices for reminders from
Right.
Carolyn?
Yeah, thanks. So I think one of the things that we've seen is there are many ways to do reminders. And there was actually some research done in the medical space, but also I think it applies to other spaces as well, where text reminders increased the take-up rate of appointments or increased the show rates, if you want to think of it that way, by a tremendous amount, like 70 to 80%. It wasn't a small number, and it wasn't surprising because people get busy and they forget. Now, what you see oftentimes is email reminders. You'll see text reminders. I would say that in the normal course of operations in B2B, the calendar itself will do a reminder, but I don't think it's a bad idea to do an email reminder. I would say best practices are probably for consumer type appointments, whether that's a hair salon or whether that's a medical appointment or anything where you're going to a consumer type situation, a text reminder or two is probably okay, as long as you follow the opt-out rules. And I think that most people appreciate it as long as it's not overwhelming. There also are other kinds of reminders, for example, phone reminders, and you can do that with systems through the phone companies where you can actually leave a voicemail, go direct to voicemail through the interfaces without even calling the phone. But I would say text reminders are best practices for consumer. I would say email reminders and gentle email reminders, that might be even personalized, are best for the B2B use case. That's my observation.
Okay, Michael is saying that sync to calendar can be unreliable.
Yeah, this has been the challenge for many, let's say, in the industry. The standards organization that's involved has spent a lot of energy on this, and they have Apple and Google and others as members. It's called Cal Connected for those that are the nerdy and they want to look at all the specs. And I've been to their meetings, and they're like a lot of meetings in the standards industry, pretty painful, but very important. So a lot of it comes down to the calendars that I call the calendar of record, right? It's your calendar. Like in my case, it's my Google calendar, but I have two. I have a business calendar and I have a personal calendar. And companies like Accountly, Chronify, and others will take into account multiple calendars, and they will poll both of them to make sure that you don't have a time that's not busy. That has gotten pretty reliable, I would say, in general. Google is a pretty good, let's say, actor in terms of making their stuff available through APIs. Microsoft Exchange and its progeny, Office 365, also is pretty well behaved, although security can get in the way sometimes because they sometimes will block access to that. But if you do provide that, that should work. Apple has always been a little tricky because they like to do their own thing. And that happens all the time. But the most recent thing that they've done is added, you may have noticed if you use an iPhone, it'll say, do you want to add travel time to that? Well, that isn't supported in the spec, and it doesn't show up on any other calendars. That kind of thing is really annoying because now you've introduced something that's a feature that isn't standard. So I would say that it always comes down to the vendors trying to keep up with the other technologies. And in general, I think we're at about a 98% rate right now. I think it's in pretty good shape.
Okay. So are there stats about the amount of time saved by using a booking tool? Could help me convince my team to offer it more frequently if they saw that they could get booked appointment 5 times faster, for instance.
Yeah, I don't, Aaron, I'm not sure that there's stats about that. I think every company, will talk about the efficiency and how much easier and faster it is, just without, really any evidence to support that. But I think intuitively, if there is a system, they talk about the back and forth a lot. I send you an email saying, oh yeah, I want to get together. And you send me an email that says, well, what's good for you? And you send me an email saying, well, how about next Thursday? And you go, that sounds great. And then they don't get back to you. They said, yeah, how about Thursday at 2? And you go, oh shoot, I've already booked Thursday. How about the Tuesday after that? Everybody has been through that, right? It just always happens. So I think that, I don't know how much data you need to collect. I think you just need to talk to people and say, hey, wouldn't you like to, make your life a little easier? I think I did see some stats way back when that says, each rep can save an hour a week or 2 hours a week. But to be honest, those arguments just never seem to fly. It has to come down to, this is going to make my life easier. It's going to make my client's life easier. And ultimately, it's going to be more efficient. I can spend my time doing other things and I won't drop the ball. And I think that's probably the biggest issue. It's not that it's 5 times faster. It's that, oh my God, I forgot to get back to this person. And now that didn't happen and I might have lost the deal. I think it's more about a consistent approach and not having a human having to go deal with all this stuff and not necessarily, losing the thread completely if you get overwhelmed. To me, that's the biggest benefit personally.
Yeah, there certainly must be more appointments made that, don't, like you said, have that back and forth. ending in frustration rather than an appointment.
Yeah, I just was reading an article. I didn't put it up there, but the change in just sort of how the world is operating. There was a number of restaurants, and I don't know if this is going to be a trend, but they're out in California, who basically stopped answering their phones. They stopped. They said, if you want to get a reservation, you go on the website, you go on the mobile app. We're not going to take reservations over the phone. And I just sort of gasped and went, oh my gosh, what will happen now? But you know what they found is that the amount of time they were spending, with their staff, and their staff is very limited, and obviously it's very difficult right now with staffing in general, dealing with phone calls was just too much. And they said, we do not want to do it anymore. So that's sort of like the extreme end of this idea that, having to negotiate times is a very time consuming activity in and of itself. And if, you have to be convinced of that, I'm kind of like, I don't want to have to convince you of that with studies. It's like you either get it or you don't, honestly, but that's just me.